Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the Starlink 9-10 mission. I'm Stephen Young, and I'll be your commentator for tonight's launch. We're broadcasting from Spaceflight Now's News Bureau at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. SpaceX is less than 30 minutes away from launching a Falcon 9 rocket carrying 20 satellites for the Starlink internet service. Liftoff from Space Launch Complex 4 East at Vandenberg Space Force Base in California is scheduled for 10:14 p.m. Pacific Time, that's 1:14 a.m. Eastern, or 06:14 UTC for our viewers around the world. With the loading of propellants already underway, the launch team is now locked into that liftoff time. Should it become necessary, additional launch opportunities are available tomorrow during a 4-hour window that opens at 9:51 p.m. Pacific. SpaceX no longer provides us with countdown audio and video until the final 5 minutes before liftoff. We'll bring that to you here as soon as we have it. Spaceflight Now is powered by our viewers and members. We can't provide this coverage without your support. You can help us out by simply hitting the like button on this stream. Also, click subscribe so you get notifications when new videos are posted. That way you won't miss any of our live coverage. Also, share a link to this stream. It helps more people find our coverage and everything else going on with our channel. If you'd like to do more to help improve and expand our coverage of the space program, please consider making a donation through YouTube's Super Chat feature or by becoming a member of our YouTube channel. Membership grants you access to our special members-only videos, as well as discounts at our online shop, shop.spaceflightnow.com. A huge thank you to everyone who's made a contribution to help fund our coverage. And just taking a quick look into the chat, someone who's supported us this evening is James Castile, who says in a super chat, a $12 super chat, "Special greetings to my Dade County family. Go SFN, go SpaceX." Also getting support from Astro Joe, one of our moderators, who's gifted a Spaceflight Now membership. If you received that gift, be sure to give Astro Joe a thanks. Weather conditions look ideal for launch when SpaceX starts providing us with video at about the T-minus 5-minute point. We're expecting to see a fog-free launch pad tonight. Winds are calm and skies are clear this evening, although there is some haze and smoke from wildfires in the Vandenberg area. If you're one of those people who's been affected by the fires there, our thoughts go out to you. Hopefully everyone out there is safe and able to enjoy the launch tonight. Just dipping back into the chat, a big thank you to Patty Chichel for a $1 Spaceflight Now membership gift, and Callistia Lee for gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships. Also, thank you to Stephen, who has donated a $10 super chat. Thank you very much for your support and helping us do what we do here at Spaceflight Now. Let's take a look at the countdown timeline for today's Starlink mission. Before we came on air, the launch director performed a go-no-go poll of their team based at the Launch Control Center, which at Vandenberg is located about 11 miles north of the pad. Today's launch will also be supported by teams at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. The countdown's automated propellant load sequence began at the T-minus 35-minute mark. That process gets underway with the loading of kerosene on the first and second stages, along with liquid oxygen for the first stage. With 30 minutes left on the clock, cryogenic helium load starts. Helium is loaded into carbon fiber pressure vessels located inside the rocket's liquid oxygen tanks. That helium plays an important role pressurizing the rocket's tanks as the propellants are consumed. This pressure keeps liquid oxygen and kerosene flowing into the rocket's Merlin engines. The loading of helium starts with the first stage and continues with the second stage 4 minutes later. Loading of kerosene aboard the second stage should have wrapped up at about the T-minus 23-minute mark. Meanwhile, loading of kerosene into the much larger first stage fuel tank will continue. The next major event just about to happen in real time is the start of the strung-back chill-down process. The strung-back structure sits alongside the rocket at the launch pad. In addition to supporting the vehicle, it serves as the conduit for propellant lines, air conditioning, and power for both the rocket's second stage and the payload fairing. If we could see the launch pad right now, this chill-down process would be clearly visible in the form of the so-called big vent. This cloud of vapor is created as the liquid oxygen lines are cooled before the next major milestone in the countdown. That comes at T-minus 16 minutes, when it's the turn of liquid oxygen to start flowing through the strung-back lines into the second stage. At T-minus 7 minutes, the chill-down of the 9 Merlin first stage engines will get underway. This involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps. This will protect those engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes prior to launch, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. Then at T-minus 4.5 minutes, we'll see the strung back start retracting from the Falcon 9 rocket. Prior to this, the pressure will be increased in the propellant tanks to strengthen the structure of the rocket as it loses that physical support that the strung back provided. The strung back at Vandenberg is a little different from the ones you might be used to seeing at Cape Canaveral and Kennedy Space Center. It will recline at this stage in the countdown to an angle of about 13 degrees and remain in that position through liftoff. About 3 minutes before ignition, the first stage liquid oxygen tank should be full. And then around 2 minutes before launch, liquid oxygen loading should be complete on the second stage. At that point, the Falcon 9 will be fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellants. In the final 60 seconds, the countdown will be controlled by the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers. Up until this point, the ground sequencer has been running the operation. The propellant tanks will be brought up to flight pressure, and then the SpaceX launch director will give their final go for liftoff if everything is looking good. The engine ignition command will be issued at T-minus 3 seconds. If all 9 Merlin 1D engines ignite and are healthy, the flight computer will command the hold-down clamps to release the Falcon 9 for liftoff at T0. Once again, launch today is scheduled for 10:14 p.m. Pacific time. T-minus 17 minutes and counting. That chill down of the strung-back structure will soon wrap up if everything is going to plan out at Space Launch Complex 4 East at Vandenberg. Once that operation is complete, the start of liquid oxygen loading will begin. As I noted during the rundown of the countdown at this point, the rocket is being loaded with liquid oxygen and kerosene in the first stage. The second stage has its full load of kerosene and is about to start receiving liquid oxygen. And with the countdown just passing the T-minus 16-minute mark, if all is going well, the liquid oxygen loading on the second stage should have just got underway. This will be the 11th flight of this particular Falcon 9 booster. It has the tail number B1081. The booster entered service in August last year at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. It first flew with a Dragon carrying a multinational crew representing 4 countries to the International Space Station. It continued to serve the space station program, launching 6,500 pounds of supplies and equipment to the orbiting outpost in November 2023. Its third launch was its first Starlink delivery flight, lifting off from Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in December 2023. In February of this year, it launched another mission for NASA, carrying the agency's Plankton Aerosol Cloud Ocean Ecosystem Earth Observing Satellite, known as PACE for short. The booster then moved over to the West Coast, launching 53 payloads in March on the Transporter 10 rideshare mission. It then launched 21 Starlink satellites into orbit in April, Next up was the launch of the EarthCare mission for the European and Japanese space agencies in May. Launch number 8 was in June. The booster carried out a mission for the National Reconnaissance Agency, which operates the United States spy satellites. NRO 186 mission was the second launch for the NRO's so-called proliferated architecture. That's believed to be made up of SpaceX-built Starshield satellites. 1081's last 2 missions were Starlink deliveries, that most recent flight taking place 45 days ago. We're now at T-minus 11 minutes, 57 seconds, and counting. If you're just joining us, we're awaiting the launch of a Falcon 9 rocket carrying 20 Starlink satellites. Liftoff is scheduled for 10:14 p.m. Pacific time. This is a file photo of what the standard Starlink V2 mini satellites look like when they're stacked in launch configuration. This photo was taken last year before a previous Starlink launch. We've not seen the cell-capable satellites in ground processing photos, but if we get video during the payload fairing separation on today's launch, look out for the spacecraft with the white dots. As you can see from this photo, the satellites are stacked one on top of each other, flat packed. And you will notice that the 13 satellites that have the direct cell capability have that apparent difference in the white dot. So try and watch out for that during the footage later tonight. So there's a total of 20 Starlink satellites on board with the 13 direct-to-cell satellites that I mentioned. Each of those V2 mini satellites weighs about 1,760 pounds or 800 kilograms. The direct-to-cell versions are thought to be a little heavier, though. After the twin solar panels unfurl, the spacecraft have a wingspan of 100 feet or 30 meters. They're equipped with argon hole thrusters for in-orbit maneuvers and were built in Redmond, Washington, near Seattle. Tonight's satellite should be deployed at about an altitude of 183 miles or 295 kilometers. That orbit is inclined at 53 degrees to the equator. To date, SpaceX hasn't published a rendering or photo of an entire V2 mini Starlink satellite in its operating configuration, but thanks to Black Sky and HEO, we do have this image of one in orbit that was taken from above by one of their satellites. You can clearly see those 2 solar panels extending from the body of the Starlink satellite. After the satellites are deployed about an hour into the flight, they will use ion thrusters to raise their orbit. Those argon hole thrusters produce about 2.5 times the amount of thrust that the previous krypton gas thrusters generated that were used by the older satellites. Tonight will be the 73rd Starlink launch this year and the 203rd dedicated Starlink delivery mission overall. According to statistics that are compiled by astronomer and spaceflight expert Jonathan McDowell, SpaceX has launched a total of 7,236 Starlink satellites to date, and as of Friday, 6,571 of those were still in orbit, although not all of them have reached their operational altitudes, and some are being decommissioned and will re-enter the atmosphere. In late September, SpaceX said it had more than 4 million Starlink customers around the world.
Tanks are pressurizing for strong back retract.
And as you can see, we're now getting live footage from SpaceX, and we're able to listen in on the launch pad sounds and the countdown audio. The strong back retract is now getting underway. About 2 minutes ago, the chill down of the
has started.
There's the confirmation that that strong back lower has begun. About 2 minutes or so ago, the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines began. The propellant tanks being pressurized ahead of the move of the strong back structure. You can see the clamp arms opening up and the structure beginning to move away. The strong back structure will retract to an angle of about 13 degrees. Now less than 3.5 minutes to launch.
Stage
T-minus 3 minutes. We just heard that the loading of liquid oxygen on the first stage is complete. The rocket's autonomous destruct system will be on shortly. Coming up on the conclusion of liquid oxygen loading. Still waiting to hear that call on liquid oxygen load.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
And there it is. With that, the Falcon 9 is now fully loaded for launch. 1 million pounds of propellants are aboard the rocket. The ground gas closeouts are underway. That's the venting you can see and hear at the launch pad. SpaceX is purging the propellant lines in the strongback prior to liftoff to avoid any combustion from any remaining propellant in those lines. We're approaching the final minute.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
And the Falcon 9's onboard computers have taken control of the countdown. The Falcon 9's 2 stages will pressurize for flight. Let's listen in for the launch director's final go.
Launch.
And there we have it. Everything is on track for liftoff at 10:14 p.m. Pacific time. The Falcon 9 is on internal power. Let's listen in.
30 seconds.
Let's listen in to the final countdown.
T-minus 15 seconds. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, ignition. And liftoff Falcon 9, go SpaceX, go Starlink.
Vehicle is pitching downrange.
Stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
And there we have it, an on-time liftoff. The Falcon 9 is rolling on to the correct trajectory to reach its 53-degree inclination orbit, approaching the period where the engines will throttle down as
power and telemetry are nominal.
As the rocket approaches max Q.
Falcon 9 is supersonic.
And the Falcon 9 is traveling faster than the speed of sound and has passed the point of maximum aerodynamic pressure. There's about a minute left in the burn of the first stage. Those Merlin engines are producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust. The chill down of the upper stage Merlin vacuum engine is underway. That thermally conditions the engine for ignition.
Vehicle is following a nominal trajectory.
Everything looking good. 2 minutes into flight, we're approaching main engine cutoff or MECO. The Merlin engines on the first stage will shut down. This will be followed by stage separation and ignition of the upper stage. Jettison of the payload fairing comes next.
Main engine cutoff.
Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC ignition.
And you can see the lights of California going to be drowned out by the brilliant exhaust of the Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage, which you can see on the right side of the screen. Actually, we can still see those lights of California on the left side of the screen, where we're getting views from a camera on the first stage, looking down as the grid fins that are deployed.
Fairing separation confirmed.
As the fairing peeling away, and you can see those white dots that we believe are the direct-to-cell versions of the Starlink satellites. So if you look at the bottom left of your screen, you can see the altitude and speed of the first stage. It's continuing
Both
to
vehicles
climb.
are following nominal trajectories.
It's continuing to climb. Its momentum will carry it a little higher. You'll see the speed start to slow as it reaches the top of that arc. Now at 13 kilometers. Reaching 14 kilometers, the speed is dropping. We'll know when it has gone over the top of the hill, as it were, because that speed will start to pick up again. Looks like 115 kilometers might be the high point for the booster. That speed now starting to tick back up as the booster begins to fall back through the atmosphere. Meanwhile, the second stage continues to burn, now traveling at just under 11,000 kilometers an hour. So the next big event for the first stage will be the entry burn. The entry burn is a very important part of the recovery process for the Falcon 9. Without it, it would burn up in the atmosphere. As you can see from the speedometer there, it's falling back, traveling at increasing speeds, now at an altitude of 100 kilometers, which is considered to be the boundary of
Both vehicles continue
space.
to follow nominal trajectories.
So that entry burn essentially slams on the brakes and slows down the booster so that it doesn't just burn up as it encounters the upper atmosphere. That entry burn should last about 24 seconds, coming up
Stage 1
very
is your
soon.
burn.
Now we have ignition for the entry burn. You see the speedometer is plummeting now as the firing of those engines slows down the booster.
Stage 1 is your burn shutdown.
Atmospheric drag will now also help to slow the rocket as it nears the drone ship. It's now at an altitude of about 30 kilometers.
Stage 1 FTS is saved.
Both vehicles continue to follow nominal trajectories.
Everything looking good. 7 minutes, 20 seconds
Stage 1
into flight.
transonic. Stage 2 FTS is saved.
Coming up on the landing burn as the booster is now traveling less than the speed of sound.
Stage 1 landing burn.
There we see single Merlin engine firing to bring the booster onto the drone ship.
Stage 2 has entered terminal guidance.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing is confirmed.
There we have it. Booster 1081 on the deck of the drone ship. Of course, I still love you. Meanwhile, the second stage continuing to burn for a few more seconds. SpaceX normally stays with this. We'll wait for that call.
MVAC shutdown.
And there we have it. That Merlin vacuum engine's completed its
Nominal
first
orbit
burn.
insertion.
Confirmation that the second stage is in the correct parking orbit. That second stage engine will reignite at T plus 53 minutes and 22 seconds for a very short 1 second burn to circularize the orbit of the Falcon 9 second stage. And then about 7 minutes later, it will deploy the 20 Starlink satellites into their initial orbit, from which they will climb to reach their operational orbits. So returning to the chat briefly before we take a look at the statistics for this mission, just want to thank Alvanor 0293 for two $5 super chats, Cynthia Graves for a $5 super chat. Also, big thank you to Michael Magori, who gave a $20 super chat and said, thanks for all you do. Really appreciate the coverage. Please give a big hello to Mike Griffin. Griff to his friends, not the ex-NASA administrator, but he would have done that easily as well. His father put a man on the moon. Also, a big thank you to Toby Woby for gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships. If you received one of those, be sure to give them a big thank you. And then a $5 super chat from RPM for Years, who said, ready in Westminster, California. Hope you got to see the launch tonight. So let's take a look at Starlink 9-10 by the numbers. This was the 11th flight of Falcon 9 Booster 1081. It was the 391st Falcon 9 launch to date. The 106th Falcon 9 launch of 2024. SpaceX was hoping to reach a goal of 144 missions this year. It doesn't look like they're going to reach that goal. This was the 336th Falcon booster reflight, the 108th SpaceX orbital launch of 2024. And here at Spaceflight Now, we like to track the number of SpaceX orbital launches in the last 365 days. And that number currently stands at 123. So that gives you a sense of the flight rate overall. They are obviously short currently of their target, but still holding a very respectable number there. It's about as high as their number has got for that particular statistic all year long. This was the 97th SpaceX orbital launch from Slick 4 East and the 165th overall orbital launch from this pad. Let's take a look at the recovery stats. It was the 107th landing on the drone ship Of Course I Still Love You. The 286th SpaceX drone ship landing overall, and the 364th Falcon booster landing. Changing gears and looking at the overall space industry stats. This was the 38th orbital launch from California. The 115th orbital launch from U.S. soil. 126th orbital launch from a U.S. rocket company. And the 207th orbital launch globally. All of these stats are for this particular calendar year. And of those 207 launch attempts, there were 6 launch mishaps where payloads were not successfully delivered to orbit. So with that, I'd like to thank you for joining us for our coverage of the Starlink 9-10 mission this evening. It's a busy few days coming up for SpaceX. We are expecting a Falcon 9 launch from here at the Cape on Sunday. That's carrying another batch of Starlink satellites to orbit. That launch actually pushing the envelope a little bit with 24 Starlink satellites aboard. Liftoff from Space Launch Complex 40 is scheduled for 4:28 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll be on the air about an hour ahead of that planned liftoff. But that's not it. There's also a commercial launch coming up. The launch of the KoreaSat 6A mission is scheduled for Monday. And that will go from Pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center. You can take a live look at that launch pad. SpaceX recently attached the reaction frame, the mount to which the rocket is attached to the white strongback structure you can see there on the launch pad. That strongback structure with the launch mount weighs in at about 1 million pounds. It's going to roll back to the vertical integration facility, the hangar at Launch Complex 39A, and the Falcon 9 rocket with the KoreaSat 6A payload will be attached, and it will roll back out to the pad. And that launch is scheduled for 12:07 p.m. Eastern Time. It's going to be an interesting mission because it will be the 23rd flight for that particular Falcon 9 booster. It will also return to a landing at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station at SpaceX's Landing Zone 1 site. So be sure to stay tuned to Spaceflight Now if you haven't done so already. Hit the subscribe button and you'll get notified when we go live for those next 2 launches. So before I sign off, just want to give a big thank you to our moderators, Callistia Lee, who I think has been holding down the fort, along with Astro Joe. Thank you for keeping the chat kosher, as Will likes to say. We really appreciate all the work you do to help the Spaceflight Now community. So with the mission elapsed time approaching 20 minutes into flight, stay tuned to Spaceflight Now for an update on the deployment of the satellites, which should be coming up in a little over 40 minutes. And we will report that on the website when we have that. So once again, thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you for the launches later this weekend. Until then, have a good night.